各位朋友们，大家好，欢迎上线收看彼岸文化出品的第71期，由主讲人 Stephen Little 带来的主题讲座之前世今生映射无限，跨文化的宇宙观。我是本期的主持人赵佩瑶。每一期呢，我们的讲座都会有一些新加入的朋友，所以佩瑶先向大家简单的介绍一下彼岸文化。我们从2020年6月开始，在线上推出了一系列的文化讲座。主创团队一直秉承着用原创的视角和精心打磨的内容，将中国文化在国际文化研究领域以及博物馆界的影响，以一种多元化的形式向大家展现出来。在纪念张爱玲100周年的系列讲座当中，以美国南加州大学珍藏的张爱玲遗物展为切入，我们邀请到了国际著名的电影演员陈冲和 UCLA 大学中国电影文化研究专家 Michael Berry 白瑞文教授进行了一次关于张爱玲作品在影视化当中的探讨。前不久，我们携手纳尔逊博物馆的中国艺术研究员陆林恩，走进了美国中西部密苏里州堪萨斯市的纳尔逊阿金斯艺术博物馆。自1933年成立以来，中国艺术就是那里的重要馆藏。在那儿，我们也是一起探寻了大美的中国艺术。在东方元素与现代韵味之叹息常域绘画语言的中西融合的讲座当中，我们和美术学博士、旅美中国艺术家、艺术史研究者和策展人石向东老师一起走进了艺术家常域背后的生活。生前的常玉没有机会赢得市场的认可，也没有办法载入艺术史的宏大名单。但是在他去世了50年之后，常玉的作品却拍出了天价。在时代浪潮退尽以后，曾经深埋的艺术家也才被发现。在这一期讲座当中，我们也探讨了现在读到的艺术史本质是不是都是短视的呢？在100、200年以后的今天，是否还是会和以前一样呢？早前，彼岸也是跟随了北京大学考古系学士与硕士、堪萨斯大学获得中国艺术史博士的常青老师的脚步，一起探索了美国博物馆收藏的中国艺术品来源。在常青老师的讲解当中，我们也得以窥见美国的中国艺术品收藏的背后三股的中坚力量，分别是博物馆的策展人、古董商以及收藏家们背后的精彩故事。佩瑶刚刚提到的这些内容，大家都可以在 YouTube 以及哔哩哔哩的彼岸文化频道当中找到。同时呢，也欢迎大家添加微信 BACLAA 进入彼岸文化的微信群，我们之后的精彩信息都会在群中进行公布。好，接下来呢，正式进入到本次的讲座主题。本次呢，我们邀请到了大咖 Steven，他将会围绕他的展览展开。该展览呢是由 LACMA 和卡内基天文台以及格里菲斯天文台的科学家共同策划，汇集了来自于不同文化和历史时期的珍贵艺术作品。这一些作品通过了艺术和建筑的视角，共同探索了人类对于宇宙起源、运行机制和它意义的理解。好，说了这么多呢，接下来马上请出 Seven 为大家进行精彩的分析。
So thank you again. It's my honor and pleasure to join this Zoom meeting. And I'd like to begin by saying a few words of introduction about this exhibition at LACMA, Mapping the Infinite Cosmologies Across Cultures. This opened on October 20th of last year, and it has a few more weeks during which it will be on display until March 2nd of this year. The next slide, please. And the next one. This is a map of the main Native American tribes that inhabited the Los Angeles area and Southern California until probably the mid or late 19th century. There are very few of these people survive today, but we begin the exhibition with just a few ideas behind some of their cosmologies. But let me begin by saying a few words about the exhibition as a whole. This exhibition we have been discussing for over 10 years. And Michael Govan, LACMA's director, and I are both amateur astronomers. And we actually began speaking about the possibility of organizing an exhibition on the global history of cosmology in 2010, actually before I was hired. And so this exhibition is partly supported by the Getty Foundation in Los Angeles. And last year, they helped support a big series of exhibitions in and around Los Angeles on the theme of art and science. So when this was announced in 2019 that this would be happening, we thought this is the best time to do this exhibition. I have a long-standing interest in astronomy. When I was a student in college, in university, at Cornell University, I was for a while an astronomy major. I was an undergraduate in uh, the department at Cornell run by the very famous American astronomer Carl Sagan, who has passed away, but he was very inspiring. I unfortunately did not have the skill in calculus and mathematics to continue working in astronomy, and I changed my major to art history. So I've been an art historian focused on Asia and specifically China for most of my career, but I've never lost my interest in astronomy. And this exhibition looks at about 12 different cultures around the world, including China, and starts very early with early Mesopotamian culture in Iraq and goes right up to the present and introduces some basic ideas about cosmology today. Uh, the exhibition is not a comprehensive survey of cosmology around the world, but it is more a series of meditations on 12 different cultures, how they answer certain basic questions. So let me tell you what these questions are that are they are the skeleton of the exhibition. They are the conceptual underlying structure of the exhibition. The first question is, in any given culture, how is the universe created? What is the story? What is the narrative in any given culture about the beginning of the universe, the origin of the universe? Every culture has a different story, but we will look at those. Secondly, the second question is, how do different cultures conceive of space? For example, how do different cultures conceive of the relationship between the earth and the sky? How do different cultures map the sky? Throughout human history, when people looked at the sky, there are those things that appear to be fixed and don't move, like stars, like constellations. And then there are the things that move, like the sun, the moon, the planets. Um, those things are very predictable, very regular movements of objects in the sky. And then there are also things that appear in the sky that are unpredictable and problematic and sometimes dangerous. One is eclipses, both of the sun and the moon, when the sun and moon disappear for a short time, and then also comets. Comets appear out of nowhere. They don't last long, they disappear. But until recently, when through telescopes one could see comets long before they become visible as they approach the sun and then go off again, comets were considered often omens, good or bad, throughout human history and eclipses as well. The third question that we ask is, how do different cultures conceive of time? How do different cultures count time? Through most of human history, um, the counting of time according to years and months and days and hours, those are all based on the orbits of the sun and the moon. Through most of human history, people thought that the sun and moon orbited the Earth. Now we know that the Earth orbits the sun and the moon orbits the Earth. That was only really first discovered about three or 400 years ago. But this question of time is very interesting. Thanks to Albert Einstein, the great scientist, we know that space and time are connected. And we know that large gravitational fields in space bend space. And when you bend space, you bend time. So we know now that time is not the same everywhere. We know that time can bend. The faster you move through space, approaching the speed of light, clocks slow down. So these are very strange, complex ideas, but they are known to be true. In some cultures, time is like an arrow that moves in a line from the past through the present into the future. In many cultures, time is imagined as a cycle, almost as a circle that comes around. Slightly different each time, but the circular motion of time is very common in many cultures. Another question is, does time exist? Is time something real? Is it tangible, or is it just a projection of our minds? That's a very complex question also. And then the fourth and last question that we ask in this exhibition is, what is the relationship of astronomy, which is the science of observing the sky, of understanding how things operate, how things work in the sky, and cosmology is a branch of that, which is very much about the origin of the universe, um, how the universe operates. But astronomy and cosmology are very closely connected as sciences, as disciplines. But the fourth question is this: what is the relationship between cosmology and power, political power and religious power? So in any given culture, who controls the story of how the universe is created? That's often a very political story. In some cultures, there's more than one story about the creation of the universe. But those are four essentially very simple questions, and we ask that question of almost every culture in the exhibition. Um, Very little is known about Native American cultures. There were many tribes across the United States before Europeans arrived. And so there are not many actual tangible objects that survive because most things made in those cultures were made of organic things that have not survived, like wood, leather, and so on. But the next slide, please. There is a there are some things like cave paintings, which are clearly about the sky, about stars or the sun or the moon. This is in a very small cave in Santa Barbara County, just north of Los Angeles, of the Chumash tribe, which inhabited most of Santa Barbara County, a little bit of northern Los Angeles County. These tribes had no writing, so we have no texts which would help us interpret these images, but they are clearly about the sky. And in every Native American culture and in almost every tribal culture around the world, people living on the earth were very aware of the sky. We forget today because of electricity, because of cities, what the sky looked like. In Los Angeles, it's very difficult to see stars at night because there's so much electric light. If you go far away out into the desert or into the mountains, you will see more stars. If you go to areas that are far away from cities, you will see thousands of stars. And that's how most human beings experience the sky through most of history. But we have sort of forgotten that relationship. The next slide, please. This is a carved stone or boulder from Orange County. It is now at the Bowers Museum in Santa Ana, and it is from the Tongva tribe that inhabited much of Orange County. And there are still some Tongva Native Americans surviving and some Chumash. Um, but again, these are pre-literate cultures that did not have a writing system. So this is a maze stone. The patterns on this stone are these intricate sort of mazes or labyrinths. We don't know exactly what they symbolize, but these kinds of drawings, which are actually carved into the stone, are very common in pre-literate cultures. You see such things in Europe, in megalithic sites, prehistoric sites. They're very mysterious, but they seem to suggest something about the structure of the cosmos. But again, we don't really know exactly what they symbolize. The next slide, please. So I want to talk for a minute about prehistoric Europe and Africa. It's very common around the world, especially in the Neolithic period, what would be Xin Shi Qi Shi Dai in Chinese, the late Stone Age, to find stone circles like this, sometimes small, sometimes very big. This one is the oldest one known in the world, and these are arrangements of stones that are aligned with certain stars. For example, or the sun. For example, when the sun, uh, during the longest day of the year, called the summer solstice, the sun would rise between the stones lined up in this stone circle. This is in southern Egypt. It's at least 8,000 years old. It's really, really old. The next slide, please. This site of Stonehenge in England is very famous. It is also aligned with the sun on the summer solstice. It was used as a ritual site for many hundreds of years. It originated around 3,000 years BC or BCE, so it's about 5,000 years old. Again, these are made before writing, before history is made. So uh, scientists, archaeologists often look to see if they align with sunrise at certain times of year, with certain stars, and so on. And this relationship between the earth and the sky was very important um, throughout human history. The next slide, please. This is a very rare object from Germany, from Dögwall. This was discovered in 1999, so not that long ago, in a Bronze Age tomb in Germany, which dates to almost 4,000 years ago, and it's a bronze disc with gold, little pieces of gold attached to it. It's about 30 centimeters across, and it was found by tomb robbers. So it was not discovered by archaeologists. It was found by people digging in the ground at night looking for gold in these very ancient Bronze Age tombs in Germany. And they found this object along with some weapons, and they stole it and took it to Switzerland, where it was sold to a private collector. It then moved through several private collections until the police discovered it and were able to find out where it came from. And it was returned to Germany uh, about 2003 or 4, and it's now in a museum of prehistory in the city of Halle in Germany. It's the first known object from Europe to depict things in the sky that are recognizable: the sun, the moon, and this little cluster of 7 stars just between the Earth and the moon that depict a particular star cluster in space, which you can see with your naked eye, called the Pleiades. And that is a very common object depicted in many early cultures. The next slide, and the next one. Okay. Uh, yes, this one. So the the one of the first sections of the exhibition looks at ancient Mexico and the cultures of Mexico and Central America, in this case, particularly Mexico and Guatemala, and the early Mesoamerican cultures. And this stone, which is owned by LACMA, is carved with writing from the Maya people who ruled Mexico for many, many centuries. And this is Mayan writing. These look like pictures, but this is actually Mayan calligraphy. And this dates to the 9th century. So this is about the same period as the late Tang dynasty in China. And what we have here is the name of a king. And this was carved when that person became a king. And it also mentions the date of the origin of the universe. So that date is translates to 3114 BC, which is about a little over 5,000 years ago, which is not so old. But what's important to understand is that the Mayans believed that we live in this universe that we can see, but before this universe, there were other universes existing before this one. And that at the end of this universe, there will be many universes in the future. So the universe exists and it's born, it lives, it dies, and then it's reborn. And you see that pattern in many cultures. The next slide, please. This is a wonderful stone stele, or in Chinese, a beizi, which we have borrowed from Mexico. This is also from the Maya culture. It's about 2,000 years old. It was carved probably um, just after the Han Dynasty, probably in the Sangguo period in China, but in Mexico. And it shows a human being in the lower right. And at the upper right is a large bird. And on the left is a crocodile with its head at the bottom and its body going up the left side. This young hero who is shown at the lower right is he appears at the beginning of a new universe, and he will become the sun in the sky. And he has a kind of battle with this bird who also wants to be the sun, and he will kill the bird. So it's a rather violent image, but it is a good example of how the sun in many cultures has a god, and the god looks like a human being. The next slide, please. This is something very rare. This is a photograph of one of the only surviving books from Mexico. This is from the Aztec culture, and it was painted and created just before the Spanish arrived and conquered Mexico. And then Mexico became a province of Spain called New Spain. But this book is about the planets, and it's very beautifully painted. It's made on paper. I was always taught that the Chinese invented paper, which they did, but it turns out the Mayans also made paper. And this is the Aztecs ruled Mexico after the Mayans. So this is a book, and these are symbolic images of the planet Venus. Venus is closer to the sun than the Earth. As Venus goes around the sun, uh, when it's between the Earth and the sun, it's impossible to see, but it's symbolically depicted by that kind of dark mask on the right. When Venus appears as the morning star and it rises just before the sun, it appears as this red disk on the left. So these are symbolic. These are not scientific images, but they are symbolic images of the deity, the god or goddess of Venus. The next slide, please. Okay, then we go to Mesopotamia, which is uh, where writing first appears in human history in the about 2800 BCE. Um, and in Mesopotamia, there were many different dynasties: the Sumerian, the Akkadian, the Kassite, the Assyrian, and finally the Babylonian. And in Mesopotamia, primarily in what is now Iraq, there were many different gods and goddesses. And the three most powerful gods among all the Mesopotamian gods or deities were the sun god, whose name is Ashur, the moon god, whose name is Sin, and the deity you see here with the wings. This is a woman with a helmet with bull's horns. She is a warrior. She has a pet lion on a leash. She puts her right foot on the back of the lion. And this is the goddess Ishtar, the most powerful goddess, the most powerful female deity in ancient Mesopotamia. And she was believed also to be the planet Venus. And so in this picture, you see Ishtar there at the center with the wings. And then on the left is a worshiper. And then in the sky, between Ishtar and the worshiper, is an eight-pointed star. And that is how the Mesopotamians depicted Venus. So Venus was perceived as a female deity, very powerful. In almost every culture, Venus is important because it is the third brightest object in the sky seen from the Earth. So the first is the sun. The second brightest object is the moon. The third brightest object is Venus. The fourth brightest object is the planet Jupiter. And then the fifth brightest object is a star, which is the brightest star as seen from the Earth, called Sirius. And it is also, if there were no clouds, you would see it tonight. So Ishtar is a goddess of love and of war. So very, very powerful, politically powerful. And this is a wonderful image of her with the planet Venus, which is her celestial manifestation in the sky next to her. The next slide, please. This is an example of cuneiform writing, which is the earliest known writing. This is a fairly late example. It's from the Babylonian period, about 500 BC. So this would be from about the time of Lao Tzu or Kongzi. And this is a record of, in cuneiform script or writing, of the orbits of different planets. It's very small. It's probably 8 centimeters tall. It's in the British Museum. It was discovered in Iraq in the 19th century, and it would have been a text used by an astronomer or an astrologer. And this kind of record tells us how important observing things in the sky, the planets, the stars, were for divination, for fortune telling. In most of human history, astronomers and astrologers were the same person because the purpose of studying the sky was to understand the present and the future, and anything happening in the sky was considered a sign of one kind, good or bad. The next slide, please. So then we go to Egypt. Egypt had a very large number of gods and goddesses. In ancient Egypt, the beginning of the universe was, well, the first thing to exist in the universe was an ocean, a cosmic ocean, infinitely deep, extending in every direction, dark, silent. And then out of that ocean comes a mound of earth, and that is the beginning of the earth. And as the earth emerges, there's a primordial god named Shu, who in this picture on the right, you can see him standing on the green earth god. And Shu is standing, he has brown skin, and he is lifting the sky goddess, whose name is Nut. And you can see that female figure, which her fingertips touch one horizon, her toes touch the other horizon, and she is the sky goddess. All the stars and constellations are on her body. But this is a very important moment when the earth is separated from the sky. It's really the beginning of the world. So Nut is a very important goddess. This is a detail of a coffin that is about 3,000 years old from ancient Egypt. This belongs to LACMA. And on the inside of the coffin, you will see another image of the sky goddess Nut. She is the female figure shown. Above her head is the disk of the sun, the solar disk. And the Egyptians believe that every morning Nut gave birth to the sun. And then at night, when the sun disappears, she eats the sun. And all night, the sun travels through her body until the next morning when she gives birth to the sun again. So, because of her function of controlling the movement of the sun, and all living creatures and things on the earth depend on the sun, the warmth, the light. You see the paintings of Nut very often in anything to do with death or funerals because of the fact that she gives birth to the sun every morning. She is a symbol of rebirth. And the Egyptians believed that when you died, you would go into the underworld, and then, like the sun, you could be reborn. You could reborn in the world underneath the earth, but that rebirth was very much linked to the goddess Nut and her role as giving birth to the sun for many, many centuries. The next slide, please. This is an example of a map of the sky from an ancient Egyptian tomb from the tomb of the king Seti I, who lived in the 13th century BC. This would be during the Shang dynasty in China. This map, which is on the ceiling of an underground tomb in which the pharaoh Seti I, the king, was buried, is not a scientific map of the sky, but it is a symbolic map. And on this map are all of the gods and goddesses of the planets, of the stars, of times of day. Even there were gods of time as well as space. But as I said, this is not a scientific map. It is a symbolic map of all the gods and goddesses that inhabit the sky. There are only 3 of these sky maps that exist in Egypt in tombs. And this is one of the biggest one. The next slide, please. This is a very rare drawing of another ceiling, this one from a temple of a goddess called Hathor, who is a form of the goddess Isis, who was the most powerful female deity in ancient Egypt. And this chart is very famous because it has all those gods of ancient Egypt, and superimposed on those are the Greek zodiac gods, the zodiac symbols. The zodiac is the path of the sun every year through 12 constellations. So that was first appearing in Babylonia, and then in Greece and Rome, and in the Western world. When people are born, their zodiac sign depends on which constellation the sun appears to be in at the time of their birth. So in the West, the month that you are born determines your zodiac sign, which will determine your personality, your character, your fate. In China, the Chinese also have a zodiac with the number 12, but in the Chinese zodiac is based not on the sun, but on the planet Jupiter. And while the Earth goes all the way around the sun once every year, it takes Jupiter 12 years. It's very far away. It takes 12 years to orbit the sun. So in China, your zodiac sign is based on the year that you are born, not the month. And where is the planet Jupiter during the time of your birth? So they're coincidentally both 12 signs. So in the Western world, I'm born in May, so my sign is Taurus, the bull. But in China, I was born in the year of the horse. So I am a horse. Those of you who know the calendar may figure out what year I was born. The next slide, please. In Greece and Rome, there were many famous astronomers, and the most famous was a man named Ptolemy, who lived in Egypt in the city of Alexandria during the early Roman Empire. This is a picture from a German book that illustrates the universe as imagined by this very famous Greek astronomer Ptolemy. This book was published in 1661 in Germany, but it depicts this ancient Greek idea of the structure of the world with the earth at the center. So for until probably the 17th century, most cultures, most people around the world believed that the earth was at the center of the universe and the center of the solar system, and that the moon and the sun and the five visible planets, which are Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, all orbit around the earth. And then on the and those orbits are depicted by these rings around the Earth in this picture. And then the very outermost ring is the ring or the sphere of the stars of the zodiac. So this was a very common idea that there was a kind of perfect geometry to the universe, that the planets all orbited the Earth in perfect circles. We know now that that's not true. That because of gravitational forces, the orbits of planets are elliptical and not circular. But that was not discovered until the 17th century. The next slide, please. So, in the Western world, the names of the planets that we use every day are based on the Greek and Roman gods of the planets. So, I just like to show you two of them as in their human form. Of course, they are gods. On the right is Jupiter, who is the god of the biggest planet. He is the most important god in ancient Greece and Rome. In Greece, he is known as Zeus. In Latin, in Rome, he is known as Jupiter. And on the left is Venus, the goddess of love, and she was associated with the planet Venus. So Venus in the sky would be a manifestation of this female goddess, both living on Mount Olympus in Greece. And we still, in the Western world, we still use these ancient names for the five visible planets. Interestingly, most of the names of the stars in the Western world are Arabic, and I will talk about the importance of Islamic astronomy in the Middle East in a few minutes. And then the names of many of the constellations are Latin names. Of course, China had its own names for everything: the sun, Taiyang, the moon, Taiyin, and so on. The next slide, please. We then move from Greece and Rome to India and Southeast Asia, starting with Hinduism. The Hindu world in India, where Hinduism first emerged, had its own astronomy, its own cosmology, and its own planetary system. This is a sculpture from Cambodia, from Genpujai. This dates to about the 10th century, and it depicts the Hindu gods of the sun and the moon on the far left. The five gods in the middle are the gods of the planets: Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. And then the two gods at the far right are only from the Hindu world. They are imaginary planets. They don't actually exist, but they exist in the cosmology, in the philosophy of the Hindu sky, and they control eclipses and comets, both very unpredictable, problematic things in the sky. The next slide, please. Then we move to China. The Chinese origin story, the most sophisticated and complex origin story in China about the birth of the universe is we find in the Taoist tradition, in Taoism. In such texts as in the early Han Dynasty, we see discussions of how the universe began. So if in the beginning there was nothing, which is described by philosophers like Lao Tzu as Tao, um, originally there's nothing. There's just emptiness. And then out of that empty Tao comes energy or qi. And that energy swirls in a chaotic state for many eons of time until out of the empty Tao comes yin and yang. And the yin and yang energies force the qi to begin to move in patterns. Instead of being in chaos, it begins to move in patterns that are regular, like the seasons. And the Chinese could explain almost every natural phenomenon in terms of the interaction of yin and yang. This is the basis of Chinese traditional medicine, of Chinese cooking, of Chinese military strategy. Um, it's a very simple concept, but because it's simple, it could be applied to almost anything. The male gender is yang, the female gender is yin. The five directions, north, south, east, west, and center, correspond to yin and yang. East and south are yang. West and north are yin. The center, earth, is neutral. Um, the symbolism of the animals of the directions, the dragon of the east is yang. The tiger of the west is yin, and so on. There are many systems of correspondence in China which really revolve around the five elements, wuxing, and also this idea of yin and yang. This is a Han Dynasty picture from this is an ink rubbing of a very famous tomb in Shandong province, the Wuliangzi. This is a taban, which shows the Big Dipper, Beidou. And you see the stars of the Big Dipper here, and in the bowl rides a very ancient god, Tai Yi, or Supreme One, Supreme Unity, who puts a kind of human face on the Tao, since you cannot see the Tao which is nowhere and everywhere at the same time. This is one of the earliest pictures of Beidou in Chinese culture. It's about 2,000 years old. The next slide, please. This is a very famous map of the sky, a star chart, which dates to the Southern Song Dynasty, Nan Song. It was carved into a beizi, which still survives in Suzhou, not far from Shanghai. And you can see the entire chart at the left. This is again a rubbing, a taban of the original stone, which is in the Wenmiao, the old Confucian temple in Suzhou. At the top is the title Tian Wen Tu, the chart of heaven's patterns. And when this was carved into stone in the year 1247, it was the most advanced, sophisticated map of the sky in the entire world. It is very precise. It contains over 1,400 stars. Their names are mostly there in Chinese characters. The center of the map shows the part of the sky around the North Pole, around the pole star. Beidou would be inside that inner circle. The next circle out, halfway out to the edge of the map, is the equator. So the equator that runs around the center of the Earth, if you project that out into space, everything above that is in the northern sky, everything below in the southern sky. The path of the sun is also shown as an off-center circle. The Milky Way is like a river that starts at the bottom and goes up and then bends to the left. The positions of the stars on this map are so precise, are so exact, that you could navigate across the ocean using this chart even now. The next slide, please. So if that is a scientific chart, an attempt to create a map of the sky that is scientific, these paintings, which date from the Ming Dynasty, from the early Ming, which are dated 1454, depict the gods and goddesses of the sun and the moon and the planets. So on the one hand, you have a scientific depiction of the sky, and then I think in most people's minds in China, this is how you would imagine these gods of the heavenly objects. So in this painting are the sun, which is the emperor wearing the red robe. Opposite him is the moon goddess, and then there are the five visible planets: Mars, Venus, Mercury, Jupiter, and Saturn. And then there are several other planets. There are two planets here from the Hindu world. Those planets I described when we looked at the Cambodian stone, the planets Rahu and Ketu, known as Liuho and Jidu in Chinese, who control comets and eclipses. And there are also two planets here from Persia, from pre-Islamic Iran that come into China. These non-Chinese deities come into China with Buddhism. When Buddhism comes to China from India, initially in the late Han, and then as Buddhism develops in China during the Nanbei Chao and the Tang period, some of these foreign deities of the sky come into China, and then you see them depicted in Chinese paintings like this. The next slide, please. And then these are part of the same set. These are owned by the French National Museum of Asian Art in Paris, called the Musée Guimet. These are the gods and goddesses of the 28 lunar mansions, the Ersha, which are very important divisions of the sky, the constellations through which the moon appears to move every night in a 28-day lunar month. These are also very important deities in ancient China. They had a lot to do with controlling people's fate. They don't really exist in the Western world, but very important in China and Korea and Japan. The next slide, please. This is something very rare that few people know about, even experts on China. This is a star map made in the late Ming Dynasty in the year 1634 during the reign of the last Ming Emperor Chongzhen. And this was made by a Chinese astronomer who was the chief astronomer in the Forbidden City, Xu Guangqi, with a German Jesuit Catholic priest named Johann Adam Schall von Bell, who brought many scientific astronomical instruments to China at the end of the Ming Dynasty. These Jesuit priests were sent to China by the Vatican to convert the Chinese to Christianity and Catholicism, in which they largely failed. But they brought a lot of scientific knowledge from Europe, including astronomy, anatomy, cartography, map making, hydraulics, things like that. And so this German Catholic priest, von Bell, worked with Xu Guangqi in the Forbidden City, and they created this very detailed star map, which is a combination of Chinese astronomy and European astronomy. And this map only exists in two copies that survive today. One is in the Forbidden City in the Palace Museum, the Gugong in Beijing, and the other is in the Vatican. And we have this one in the exhibition at LACMA is from the Vatican. We were not allowed to borrow the original, but this is a photograph printed on vinyl with a light box behind it. So it's a very large, very beautiful star chart, extremely rare. An interesting cross-cultural moment between China and Europe. The next slide, please. Now, the Middle East. The Islamic Middle East is very important in the history of astronomy and cosmology for three reasons. The first reason is that the Islamic Muslim astronomers in the Middle East between about the 9th and the 10th century CE or AD were very brilliant mathematicians in fields like algebra, in fields like mathematics generally. The word algebra in English is an Arabic word. The word zero is an Arabic word that has worked its way into all of the European languages. One of the main things that the Islamic astronomers did in places like Baghdad and Damascus was to create very precise instruments like this one called an astrolabe, which was designed to find certain stars. So the astrolabe consists of a brass disc, solid, and then on top of that is a rotating open work disc, which you could rotate to certain times of the year and certain hours of the day or night, and that would tell you where a certain star was located in the sky. This is a beautiful example in LACMA's collection that was made by a Muslim instrument maker in Spain when southern Spain was controlled by Islamic rulers from North Africa in the 13th century. You can see from the name of the man who made this, it's signed Mohammed ibn Abd al-Aziz al-Kamairi, and it dates to the year 1226. The next slide, please. Then in Europe, there is a lot of influence of Arabic astronomy into the Renaissance. One of the important things that happened in the Islamic world in places like Baghdad in the 8th, ninth, 10th century. In China, this would be sort of late Tang to Wu Dai period. Many of the ancient Greek astronomers' books were translated into Arabic, and because of that, they have survived. The Greek originals often don't exist, but the Arabic translations of the old Greek astronomers' works survive. And then in the 10th and 11th centuries, many of those Arabic books were translated into Latin in parts of Europe where there were Muslims, like Sicily and Spain. Uh, so people, very famous European astronomers like Copernicus in the 16th century and Galileo in Italy in the 17th century were reading Latin translations of Arabic books on astronomy, and some of them were Arabic translations of ancient Greek works. This is a very interesting book in the exhibition by an English astronomer named Robert Flood, who lived in the early 17th century. And this picture in his book it's an attempt to make a picture of the universe before it's created, when it's just empty. This is a very contemporary kind of idea to make a picture of nothing, basically. Um, Not easy to do. And he just creates a black square. And in the margins of the drawing in Latin, it says, like this into infinity in every direction, black, dark, emptiness. And then, of course, in the European world, God will create the world. He will introduce light, and then the earth, the sun, the planets, and so on. But this is a very unusual drawing from the year 1617. This would be late Ming Dynasty in China to make a picture of nothing. Very, very, very unique. The next slide. This is a picture in the exhibition from a book by an English astronomer named Thomas Wright, who published this book in 1750. Wright was one of the first, by this time, of course, telescopes existed, having been first used to look at the sky by the Italian astronomer Galileo in the year 1610. And the telescope had just been invented in Holland the year before in 1609. Galileo wrote to Holland and was able to get some Dutch glass lenses. The Dutch were very famous makers of glass lenses. In fact, the microscope was invented in Holland and the telescope. And Galileo heard about the telescope, which was invented not for astronomy, but for military use, to look across a great distance at an opposing army, for example. How many soldiers were in the army that you were about to go into battle with? So Galileo made his own telescope with these Dutch lenses, and he starts looking at the sky. And with his observations, he is the first one to prove through actual observations of the sky that the Earth is not the center of the universe and not the center of the solar system, but the sun is the center. And that was, it took about 50 years for people to accept that, but now we know it's true. So Thomas Wright in England is using more advanced, larger telescopes, and he is the first one to propose that the shape of the Milky Way galaxy in which we live is like a disk, is like a plate. It's flat, very big. And he also proposed an idea that was quite revolutionary, that this universe in which we live is only one universe of many, that there are many different universes existing at the same time. And this is a picture that he published in this book in 1750 in London, depicting his concept of multiple universes uh, that exist simultaneously. It's actually a very contemporary idea. It cannot be proven yet, but it can be proven to be true, possibly mathematically. And who knows, someday we may discover other universes besides this one. The next one, the next slide, please. We end the show with some modern and contemporary. If you could go back to the previous slide. Yeah, this I would say the modern history of cosmology really begins with this astronomer Edwin Hubble, who worked in Pasadena in Los Angeles County in the early part of the 20th century. Um, the first space telescope was named for him, the Hubble Space Telescope, which orbits the Earth in space. The advantage of a space telescope is that you don't have to look through the Earth's atmosphere. You're outside of the atmosphere. The atmosphere can distort images coming to a telescope. And on the night of October 6th, 1923, so just over 100 years ago, Hubble was using what at the time was the biggest telescope in the world on Mount Wilson above Pasadena in the San Gabriel Mountains. And he was, he as a result of what he saw that night, and this is a negative photograph taken with his telescope on that night, which is a negative image of the Andromeda galaxy. And he was the first one to discover that outside the Milky Way, there are other galaxies. This was the first time that was discovered. But he was not looking for other galaxies. He was looking for a kind of star that changes its brightness. It becomes dim. The stars called variable stars. I mean, our own sun, which is a star, has its brightness is the same all the time. But variable stars actually change. Their brightness goes up and down and up and down. And if you could chart or do a graph of that variation in the brightness of a variable star, there was a mathematical formula whereby you could calculate the distance of the star from the Earth. And this mathematical equation was discovered by a group of women in the 1890s at Harvard University. And Hubble here in Pasadena was using their mathematics to look for variable stars. Now, at the time, people knew the Milky Way galaxy in which our sun and our Earth exist was about 100,000 light years across from one side to the other. That means light from one side would take 100,000 years traveling at the speed of light to go from there all the way to the other edge of the galaxy. So all the variable stars that Hubble was finding were inside the Milky Way. They were less than 100,000 light years away. And he finds this variable star in a little fuzzy patch of light, which was known as the Andromeda Nebula, which people thought was something inside the Milky Way. And he does the mathematics, and then he discovers to his shock that this variable star that he has just discovered is 2.5 million light years away. It is outside the Milky Way, not inside. And he has just discovered the Andromeda galaxy. So this is a negative image that he took on that night that he was studying. He was very excited. He puts this is Hubble's handwriting on the glass. It's a glass plate photograph, a negative image. He writes 6 October 1923. And then at the top in red, VAR exclamation point, which stands for variable star. Um, this was one of the biggest discoveries of cosmology of the 20th century, and it happened here in Los Angeles County. The Carnegie Observatory still exists in Pasadena. We have worked very closely with them on parts of our exhibition. They're funded by the Carnegie Foundation in Washington, D.C., and they employ 40 cosmologists at any given time from all over the world. And they operate the biggest telescopes on the Earth, which is in the country of Chile, in the southern hemisphere, at the bottom of South America, in the Andes Mountains, which is very dry, very clear skies, where at night you can see thousands of stars with your naked eye, and they have these huge telescopes there, which again, astronomers from all over the world use them. The next slide, please. This is a photograph taken by the Hubble Space Telescope about 20 years ago after it was launched into space. This is a very famous image of a very tiny part of the sky. If you look at the sky, this would be about 1 inch of the sky. Everything you see in this photograph is a galaxy. These are not stars. These are all I mean, there are one or two or three stars here, but everything in this photograph is a galaxy. By the time Hubble died, he had discovered about 80 different galaxies. Now there's a big international effort to map the universe. And the next slide is a still photograph from a computer animation. The next slide, please. This slide is an international project to map all of the galaxies that can be seen in space. This is ongoing. It's run by a brilliant woman at the Carnegie Observatories in Pasadena using telescopes in Chile and in the state of Arizona, so southern hemisphere, northern hemisphere. Every dot in this image is a galaxy. We now know that there are trillions of galaxies. And this is looking back out in space about 13 billion light years. So this is an astonishing image. The black areas here are parts of the sky they have not yet mapped. So there'll be probably another 10 years of this project before it's done. But it is an astonishing project because of this sky survey. We now know that the universe is much bigger than anyone ever imagined. In the 1920s, people thought the Milky Way galaxy was the entire universe. And then Hubble discovers other galaxies. And so almost every year we discover something new. And the last slide, the next slide, is a very interesting image, which was taken in only 2 years ago, in 2023. And this is an image of the center of the Milky Way, taken with radio telescopes. This photograph of the center of the Milky Way was taken. Astronomers based in Pasadena were able to take this image using radio dishes because everything in space, every object like a star or a galaxy emits radio waves. They emit X-rays, gamma rays, visible light rays, radio waves. And if you look at the center of the Milky Way from the Earth, you can't see it because it's in this constellation called Sagittarius, but between us and the center of the Milky Way are big clouds of dust, huge clouds of interstellar dust. And the center of the Milky Way is on the other side. So light waves cannot penetrate those clouds of dust that are floating between the stars, but radio waves go right through the dust. Just as if you're inside a house or inside a building and you turn on a radio, you'll hear somebody speaking or music because the radio waves come right through the wall of your house, which appears solid, but radio waves go right through solid things. And this is a very new image of something we cannot see with an optical telescope. And if you look at this image, you will see these vertical wavy lines, these filaments in space that cannot be seen with an optical telescope. And nobody, even the astronomers, have no idea what these are. These are mysterious things. And I'm ending with this slide just to illustrate the fact that as much as we know, there's much more that we don't know. And so one of the underlying messages of my exhibition is that all cosmologies are temporary. All ways of understanding the universe from the earliest periods, even prehistoric, up to date, are temporary. They will be not necessarily discarded, but they will be refined. They will become more precise. So if you have a chance, please come to LACMA and see the show. You've got about 4 more weeks. It closes on March 2nd. There's never been an exhibition like this in an art museum before. You see things like this in science museums or planetariums, but I thought using both works of art and works of science, it would be a very unique project to do something like this for a different audience in a museum devoted to art. So thank you very much.